The night it happened, I can still hear the knock on my door, hard, sharp, like they wanted to break it down. I opened it just a little, and there they were, the HOA president, standing with two men behind her, smiling that fake smile, and then she said it. "We called the police on your wife." I froze, because they had no idea who my wife really was. And when the police walked up our driveway, everything changed. Welcome back to HOA Stories, where I share the wildest and strangest and sometimes darkest tales from suburbia. My name's Daniel. I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside Phoenix, Arizona. On the surface, it looks peaceful. White fences, green lawns, friendly neighbors. But if you live here long enough, you'll see the truth. Behind those smiles lies the iron grip of the HOA. And this time, they made the biggest mistake of their lives. The night felt heavy, like the air itself knew something was about to happen. I stood there at the doorway, the HOA president staring at me with that practiced smile. Her lipstick was perfect, her hair pulled back tight, but her eyes never matched the smile. They were cold, sharp, like little knives searching for weakness. Behind her were two men in neon green shirts. One held a clipboard, the other had a phone ready, recording everything like he was building a case. They weren't neighbors. They were soldiers in the HOA army, and right behind them, slowly walking up my driveway, was a man I had never seen before. Tall, bald, tattoos climbing his arms like snakes. His shirt said Inspector, but his eyes told a different story. He wasn't here to inspect. He was here to intimidate. Then I heard the sound that froze me. Police radios crackling from the street. Two officers were stepping out of their car, their boots hitting the pavement, hard, steady, like a warning drumbeat. And that's when the HOA president said, "It again, this time louder. We called the police on your wife." My chest tightened, my hands clenched without me even thinking, because they had no idea who my wife really was. You see, in our neighborhood, the HOA ruled like kings and queens. They fined people for weeds in their yard, for the wrong color of curtains, even for parking in the street too long. They thought they had power, but real power wears a badge, and that badge was sitting right in our kitchen at that moment. My wife, the sheriff of the county, she didn't know yet, not fully, what was happening at the door. She was making coffee, probably humming the same tune she always did when she wanted to stay calm, but in a matter of seconds, everything would change. I looked back at the HOA president. Her smile was wider now, almost trembling with excitement. She thought this was her victory. She thought the police were coming to drag my wife out, to humiliate us, to show the whole neighborhood who was in charge. But her victory was only in her head, because when those officers walked up the steps, the world tilted in our favor. One officer, young, nervous, his hand hovering near his holster. The other, older, tired eyes. Probably had been through enough HOA nonsense to last a lifetime. They didn't even look at me first. They looked straight at the president. She pointed at me like I was a criminal. This house, this family, is breaking HOA rules. Her voice was high-pitched now, shaky, like she was almost begging them to believe her. The younger cop tilted his head. "Ma'am, this isn't a police matter." But before she could answer, the tattooed inspector stepped forward. He slammed his fist against my doorframe, loud, shaking the wood. "This man and his wife are out of control, and you need to deal with them right now." The officers looked at each other, and for a moment, I wondered if they would listen, if they would turn the power of the badge against the very person who carried it. And then, I heard her footsteps. Slow, steady, firm. My wife stepped into the hallway, her brown sheriff jacket draped across her shoulders like it was meant for this very moment. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She just walked forward, with that calm presence that only comes from someone who's faced worse than a suburban power trip. The HOA president's smile faltered. Her eyes darted, because she knew something had shifted, something she couldn't control anymore. My wife stood beside me, looked at the officers, and then at the so-called inspector. "What seems to be the problem here?" The inspector sneered. "You broke HOA rules. You disrespected this community. You need to be punished." My wife raised an eyebrow. "Punished? By who? Silence. The president opened her mouth, then closed it again. The younger officer cleared his throat, uncomfortable, and then, slowly, my wife reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge. The metal caught the porch light, gleaming like a blade. She held it up without a word. Let it speak for her. The officer stiffened. The younger one almost tripped on his own words. Sheriffs, ma'am. We didn't know. The HOA president's face turned pale. Her fake smile gone completely. She tried to step back, but the inspector blocked her way. Even he looked shaken now. The tattoos on his neck twitching as his jaw clenched. My wife didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just said one sentence. Do you understand what you've done? The words hung in the air, heavier than any fine, sharper than any rulebook, because in that moment, everyone realized the same thing. The HOA had just called the police on the police, and the neighbors? They had started to gather on the sidewalk. Whispers spread like wildfire. Curtains twitched. Phones recorded. Everyone waiting to see what happened next. I could feel it. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about every homeowner who had ever been pushed, fined, bullied, controlled. It was about the line between neighborhood rules and real law, and my wife was about to draw that line in a way none of them would ever forget. But here's the thing. When power is challenged, it doesn't back down easily. It claws. It bites. It twists itself into something uglier than before. The HOA president's lips trembled as she tried to speak. This is still our community, and you don't belong here. And that's when my wife leaned closer, just enough for only her to hear. She whispered something that made the president's knees buckle. But what she whispered, that's the part I'll never forget, and maybe you'll never believe. Her face turned white. Like every drop of blood had left her body, the HOA president didn't even blink. She just froze, like my wife's words had locked her in place. The inspector stepped closer, his jaw tight, his hand twitching like he wanted to reach for something that wasn't there. Whatever game you're playing, he growled, it won't work here. My wife didn't move, didn't even look at him. She kept her eyes locked on the president, holding her like a predator holds prey. The younger officer shifted on his feet. The older one sighed, rubbed his temple, like he'd seen too many suburban wars before. Ma'am, he finally said to my wife, we didn't know this was your residence. She turned slowly, showed him the badge again, then tucked it back into her jacket. This is my home, she said softly, but firmly, and I will not be harassed here. Not by an HOA, not by anyone. The president blinked rapidly, her lips twitching like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. For the first time since I had known her, she looked powerless. But power is a strange thing in neighborhoods like ours. It doesn't die. Quietly, it twists, reshapes, and finds a new way to strike back. That night, after the police left, after the crowd drifted back into their homes whispering, my wife sat at the kitchen table in silence. She stared at her coffee, untouched, cold now, and I knew that silence wasn't peace. It was calculation. The HOA president thought she could scare us, but now she had just woken a storm she couldn't control. The next morning, the letters started, bright yellow envelopes stuffed in our mailbox. HOA violation notices, one after another, like a machine spitting them out. Our lawn was too long. Our trash can was visible from the street. Even the color of our porch light was non-compliant. It was laughable at first. We sat at breakfast reading them out loud, shaking our heads. But the laugh didn't last, because the fines started stacking, and with each fine came a threat. Court action, property liens, even eviction. They weren't just trying to scare us anymore. They were trying to destroy us. One evening, I walked outside to get the mail, and there he was, the inspector, leaning against his car at the end of our driveway, arms crossed, tattoos crawling up his neck like shadows. He didn't say a word. He just watched me, like a wolf waiting for a mistake. I tried to ignore him, but then I saw the camera in his hand. He was recording me, every step I took, and when I turned my back, I heard his voice finally break the silence. "You don't belong here." It sent a chill straight through me. When I told my wife, she didn't flinch, she just nodded. Then let's remind them who really does belong here. The next HOA meeting was on a Thursday night. Every month they gathered in the little clubhouse at the end of the street, folding chairs, bad coffee, a stack of rule books taller than a child, usually. No one came. The neighbors were too afraid, too beaten down by the system. But this time, the parking lot was full. Word had spread. And everyone wanted to see what would happen, because when the sheriff walked into that meeting, she wasn't just my wife anymore. She was a symbol of something bigger. We sat down in the back. The president cleared her throat, banged her gavel, tried to speak louder than the whispers in the room. "This meeting will come to order," she snapped, but her voice cracked, and everyone heard it. They started with the usual nonsense: lawn violations, paint colors, trash cans, and then, like a hammer dropping, the president turned her eyes on us. "We must discuss the matter of the Parker household." A hush fell. Every head turned, some with pity, some with curiosity, some with quiet hope. The inspector leaned forward in his chair. Smirking like he was about to witness a public execution, the president pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Dozens of violations," she said proudly, "each one documented, each one punishable." She slammed the papers down on the table, and the sound echoed through the room. My wife didn't flinch. She stood slowly, calmly, walked to the front, and when she reached the table, she didn't touch the papers. She placed her badge on top of them instead. The room went dead silent. "Do you know what harassment looks like?" she asked. Her voice was calm, steady, but sharp enough to cut glass. "It looks like targeting one family over and over. It looks like manufacturing rules to punish instead of protect. It looks like abuse of power." The inspector shifted, uncomfortable now. The president tried to speak, but my wife raised a hand, and the whole room watched her fall silent. "You think you have power because you have a clipboard, a rule book, a pen. But I carry real authority, and I will not let you abuse this community any longer." A murmur spread through the crowd, neighbors nodding, whispering, some even clapping softly. The president's face turned red, her fists clenched. "You can't threaten us," she hissed. "You may be sheriff out there, but in here, we make the rules." My wife leaned forward. Her eyes locked on the president's, and she whispered again, just like she had that night on our porch. Whatever she said, it made the president flinch so hard her gavel slipped from her hand and hit the floor. The inspector cursed under his breath. Neighbors gasped. And in that moment, everyone knew the balance had shifted. The HOA had drawn the line, but my wife had stepped right over it. And now, it wasn't just about our flag, or our porch light, or any of their petty rules. It was about survival, their survival, or ours. Because one thing was clear, the HOA wasn't going to back down quietly. They were going to fight harder, dirtier, and meaner. And as I sat back down next to my wife, I realized something chilling. We hadn't ended the war that night. We had just started it. The meeting ended in chaos, neighbors whispering, some cheering quietly, others rushing out with wide eyes. The president's face was still red, her lips trembling. But she didn't say another word that night. She just gathered her papers, shoved them into her bag, and stormed out. The inspector followed close behind, but before leaving, he turned his head and stared right at me. No smile, no words, just that cold, steady glare that told me one thing. This wasn't over, and I was right. The next morning, I woke up to find my driveway blocked, a bright orange cone placed right in the middle, and a fresh violation notice taped to my garage. Unauthorized parking obstruction. I laughed at the absurdity. But deep down, I knew it wasn't funny. This wasn't just a fine, this was psychological warfare. That same day, I saw neighbors getting new letters too, not just us, random families. The single mom down the street, the retired veteran on the corner. The HOA was spreading fear like a disease, punish a few, and control the many. But something was different now. After the meeting, After, or my wife stood her ground. People weren't just scared anymore. They were angry, and anger is contagious. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my wife flipping through another stack of yellow envelopes. She didn't slam them down, didn't rip them up. She just smiled, and that smile told me she had a plan. "We're going to give them exactly what they want," she said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She leaned back in her chair. "They want compliance? Fine, we'll comply. So perfectly, so exactly, that it'll choke them." I didn't understand at first, but then I watched it unfold. The very next day, my wife began. She measured the grass on our lawn with a ruler, cutting it to the exact height listed in the HOA handbook. Not an inch longer, not an inch shorter. She repainted our mailbox post, the exact shade of approved beige. She printed the color code right from the HOA's own documents and taped it to the mailbox for everyone to see, every single rule, every ridiculous demand. She followed to the letter. Trash cans were placed at the curb at exactly 6:00 a.m. and pulled back in at exactly 6:01 p.m. The porch light? She swapped it out with an HOA-approved bulb, even if it lit the street like a hospital hallway. And the best part? She documented everything. Photos, timestamps, receipts, all filed neatly in a folder marked HOA Compliance. The neighbors noticed. They stopped me at the mailbox, whispering, smiling. One even said, "It's like watching the sheriff arrest them with their own rules." The HOA president hated it. You could see it in her face, because every time they tried to fine us, we had proof they were wrong. Every time they tried to threaten us. We showed the neighbors the evidence, and slowly, the fear started to fade from the neighborhood. It turned into something else, hope. But hope is dangerous to people who thrive on control. The more my wife complied, the more desperate they became. One night, we found a fresh violation notice stuck to our door. But this one was different. It didn't even make sense. Violation, lawn too green. I stared at it, laughed out loud. Too green? What did that even mean? But my wife didn't laugh. She held the paper, looked at it for a long time, and then shook her head. "They're panicking," she said. "They know they're losing." And she was right again, because the very next HOA meeting, things exploded. We walked into the clubhouse. Same folding chairs, same bad coffee. But this time, the room was full. Neighbors packed every chair, standing along the walls, some even recording on their phones. The president looked nervous. The inspector sat beside her, glaring at me like I'd stolen something from him. And then she began her speech. But before she could finish her first sentence, someone from the back shouted, "What about the fake violations?" The room went silent. The president froze. Another voice shouted, "What about the threats?" And then another, "We're tired of this." The president tried to slam her gavel, but the noise drowned her out. Neighbors were standing now, demanding answers, waving their own yellow envelopes in the air. And that's when my wife stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even move far. She just walked to the front, placed her badge on the table again, and said, "This ends tonight." The room erupted in cheers. The inspector stood, his chair screeching against the floor. "You don't control this board," he barked. "This is our community." But before my wife could respond, the door at the back of the clubhouse swung open, and someone walked in. I had never seen before. A man in a suit, tall, carrying a briefcase. He didn't say hello. He didn't even look at us. He walked straight to the front table, leaned over, and whispered something in the president's ear. Her face turned white again. Her hands shook. She dropped her gavel completely this time. The inspector's phone. Ace twisted in confusion. The neighbors murmured, and my wife. She just watched, silent, calculating. The man in the suit pulled out papers from his briefcase, thick, official-looking papers, and he slid them across the table toward the president. I couldn't see the words from where I sat, but I saw the seal at the top, the county seal. And I realized this wasn't just an HOA war anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. The president's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came out. The inspector leaned over, grabbed the papers, his eyes scanning, his jaw tightening, and then he looked up, right at my wife, with a look that wasn't anger anymore, it was fear. Something was happening, something none of us expected, and it was only the beginning. The room went silent. Every whisper, every shuffle of a chair, stopped in an instant. The man in the suit stood tall, adjusting his tie as the president stared down at the papers with trembling hands. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, like she had swallowed her own voice. The inspector grabbed the papers, his tattooed hand gripping the edge so tight the veins popped. He scanned the first page, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening with every line. I leaned forward in my chair, straining to see, but all I could catch was a single phrase at the top: County investigation, HOA board misconduct. The inspector's face drained of color, the president slumped back in her chair, and the man in the suit finally spoke. "My name is Richard Cole, county investigator, and this board is under review for harassment, fraud, and misuse of power." The clubhouse erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even laughter from the back row. Neighbors clapped. Some even stood up cheering. It was like years of fear cracked open in a single moment, but the inspector wasn't clapping. He slammed the papers back onto the table. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "You can't come in here and—" Richard raised a hand, his voice calm, steady, like someone used to shutting down angry men. "This is no longer your choice. Sir, every complaint filed by homeowners, every false violation, every illegal threat, is now evidence." The president's hands shook so hard she dropped her pen. It clattered across the table and rolled onto the floor. No one picked it up. My wife watched it all, silent, her face unreadable. But I knew her. I knew that look. She wasn't surprised. She had expected this. Later, I found out she had called the county weeks earlier, not as sheriff, but as a homeowner, because she knew the HOA might have power over lawns and fences, but the law still had power over them. The president tried to speak again, but her words stumbled out in fragments. This is harassment. You can't, we're just volunteers." Richard shook his head. "No, you are not just volunteers. You are elected officials, responsible for managing funds and enforcing rules fairly. And from what I see here, you have abused that responsibility." Neighbors erupted again, shouts of agreement, hands clapping, phones recording every second. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid of the board. They were laughing at them. But the inspector didn't laugh. He stood slowly, pushing his chair back with a screech, and when his eyes met mine, it wasn't fear I saw anymore. It was something darker, something dangerous. He leaned over the table, close to Richard's face. "You think a piece of paper scares me?" he growled. "You think the county runs this neighborhood?" Richard didn't blink. "This isn't about running the neighborhood," he said. "This is about stopping corruption." The inspector clenched his fists, the tattoos on his arms twisting as his muscles tightened. For a moment, I thought he might hit him right there in front of everyone. But then he smiled, a slow, cruel smile. "This isn't over," he whispered, and he walked out. The room buzzed with tension. Some neighbors followed him with their eyes. Others whispered nervously, "But my wife?" She leaned close to me and said something that chilled me. "He won't stop until someone makes him stop." That night, we walked home in silence. The air was heavy, charged, like a storm waiting to break. When we reached our house, I saw something on our lawn. A sign, hand-painted in red letters. "Traitors." My stomach dropped. I looked around, but the street was empty. Every house dark, curtains pulled shut. My wife tore the sign out of the ground, snapped it in half, and threw it into the trash. But the message was clear. The HOA wasn't done, and the inspector wasn't finished. The next week was worse. Slashed tires on my truck, a brick thrown at our mailbox, dead flowers scattered across our porch, and every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, watching, waiting. The neighbors were split. Some stood with us, smiling when they saw my wife. Others avoided us completely. Fear had returned. But now, it wasn't just fear of the HOA. It was fear of what the inspector might do. One night, just past midnight, I woke to a noise outside, a faint scrape, like metal on wood. I pulled the curtain back, and my blood ran cold. The inspector was standing at the edge of our yard, holding something long, shiny. A crowbar. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching our house. I whispered for my wife. She came to the window, saw him, and her hand went straight to the holster at her waist. She didn't say a word, didn't even blink. She just watched him, until he finally turned and walked away. The next morning, she filed a report, not as sheriff, but as a homeowner fearing for her safety. But nothing happened. The inspector was careful, too careful. No evidence, no fingerprints, just shadows and whispers. And yet, the neighbors knew. Every day more of them came to us quietly, telling us our own stories, threats, fines, intimidation. It was bigger than we thought, much bigger. And that's when my wife made a choice. She called a meeting, not an HOA meeting, a neighborhood meeting. We gathered in our backyard, chairs, blankets, people standing shoulder to shoulder, dozens of families, more than I had ever seen together in one place. My wife stood at the front, her voice calm but powerful. They want us divided, she said. They want us afraid, but we are stronger together, and if we stand united, the HOA cannot control us anymore. The crowd roared with agreement. Some were crying, some were clapping, some just stood there with relief written on their faces. For the first time, we weren't alone, but unity has a cost, and we would pay it soon, because the very next night, our backyard fence was set on fire. The flames spread fast. I grabbed the hose. Neighbors rushed with buckets. My wife shouted orders like she was commanding a battlefield. We managed to put it out, but the message was clear. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was war. The inspector wasn't hiding now. He was sending a message, one we couldn't ignore. And as I watched the smoke rise into the night sky, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This wasn't about power or control. This was personal. The inspector wanted us gone, not just from the neighborhood, but from the world. The smell of smoke still lingered the next morning, even though the fire was small. Even though we put it out before it spread, it left a mark, not just on the fence, but on the entire neighborhood. Neighbors walked past slower than usual, staring at the blackened wood, whispering to each other. Some looked at us with pity, others with fear, because everyone knew who had done it, and everyone knew what it meant. The inspector had declared war. My wife didn't panic. She didn't cry. She stood in the backyard, hands on her hips, staring at the burned fence like it was a puzzle to solve. "This isn't just vandalism," she said quietly. "It's a message he wapu. Dachesir wants us to know he can get this close and do whatever he wants." Her calm voice scared me more than the fire, because when she got quiet like that, it meant she was planning something. That night, she stayed up late at the kitchen table, papers spread out, a laptop open, her phone buzzing with messages. I sat across from her in silence, watching her type notes, flip through documents, highlight sections of the HOA rulebook. Every so often, she'd smile to herself, not a happy smile, a dangerous one. Finally, she looked up. "If they want war," she said softly, "we'll give them war, but on our terms." I wanted to ask what she meant, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She had already decided. The next few days were strange on the surface. Life went on as usual. She went to work. I fixed things around the house. Neighbors waved nervously as they passed, but beneath it, something was brewing. One afternoon, I found her in the garage. She had set up a wall of files, papers pinned in neat rows, strings connecting names to dates, violations to board members. It looked less like a garage and more like a crime investigation room. "What is this?" I asked. She glanced up, her eyes sharp. "Evidence." I walked closer, scanning the papers, names of board members, records of fines, bank statements. "How did you get all this?" She smiled again. "People talk when they're angry, and neighbors are angrier than ever. They gave me everything." I realized then, this wasn't just about us anymore. This was about the whole neighborhood. The inspector thought he was fighting two people, but my wife was building an army, and the inspector knew it. That night, we found another message, a dead crow on our porch, its wings spread wide, a nail driven straight through its chest. The sight made my stomach twist. But my wife just bent down, studied it, then looked up at me. "He's desperate now," she whispered. "He knows he's losing control. She wasn't afraid, but I was, because desperate men are dangerous men. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be routine, but nothing about it was routine anymore. The clubhouse was packed. More neighbors than ever before. Some stood outside the windows just to listen. The air buzzed with tension. The president looked worn down. Dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking as she tried to shuffle her papers. The inspector sat beside her, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, his tattoos crawling up his neck like warnings. His eyes never left me. The man from the county was there too. Richard Cole, briefcase by his side. Calm as always, but even he looked uneasy tonight. The meeting started with the usual nonsense. Petty rule talk, yard lengths, trash bins. But no one cared. Every eye was on the inspector, every ear waiting for the storm to break. And it did, halfway through the meeting. The inspector stood, his chair screeched across the floor, echoing through the clubhouse. "I'm tired of this circus," he barked. His voice was low, but full of rage. "You all think the sheriff here can save you? You think the county can stop me? This is my neighborhood. I built this board, and I'll tear down anyone who gets in my way." Gasps filled the room. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some stepped back. But my wife didn't move. She rose slowly from her chair, calm, steady. Her badge glinted under the cheap clubhouse lights. "This isn't your neighborhood," she said quietly. "This is everyone's neighborhood, and you don't own it anymore." The inspector laughed, a low, mocking laugh that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You think your badge scares me?" he sneered. "You think rules matter to me? I don't follow rules. I make them." Then he slammed his fist onto the table so hard the president flinched. And that's when my wife did something no one expected. She pulled out a folder from her bag, thick, heavy, stuffed with documents, and she dropped it onto the table in front of the inspector. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. "This," she said, "is everything we have on you." The inspector's smirk faltered. He flipped the folder open. Inside were photos, letters, complaints. Dozens of neighbors had given her their stories, fines that didn't exist, money that disappeared from HOA accounts, threats scrawled on notes shoved under doors. "This isn't just harassment," my wife continued. "This is fraud, and with the county here tonight, it's official." Richard Cole nodded slowly, his calm voice carrying across the room. "An arrest warrant is being prepared." The inspector's face twisted in rage. He knocked the folder off the table, papers scattering across the floor. "You think you can put me in handcuffs?" he shouted. "You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The neighbors gasped. Some even backed away toward the doors. The president sank into her chair, covering her face with her hands, and the inspector stormed out, shoving chairs out of his way as he left. The room buzzed with panic and excitement. Some cheered. Others whispered nervously, but I couldn't celebrate because I knew what my wife knew. The inspector wasn't going to wait for an arrest. He was going to strike first, that night. We locked every door, every window. Neighbors promised to keep watch, but even as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I could feel it. The inspector wasn't done. He was planning something bigger, something worse. And I was right, because just before dawn, I woke to a sound outside. Not footsteps this time, not a crowbar scraping the fence, but the low hum of an engine. I pulled back the curtain, and my blood froze. The inspector's truck sat at the curb, engine running, headlights off, and inside, I could see him, staring straight at our house, waiting. The hum of the engine felt louder than it should have. It rumbled through the walls, through my chest, like a warning drum I couldn't shut out. I stood at the window, staring at the dark truck parked at the curb. The inspector sat inside, motionless, his shadow framed by the faint glow of his dashboard. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't distracted. He was waiting. I whispered for my wife. She came quickly, her eyes narrowing the second she saw him. She didn't grab her coffee this time. She grabbed her gun. "Stay inside," she told me, her voice low, steady, like she was stepping into a role she knew too well. But I shook my head. "I'm not letting you go out there alone." She stared at me for a long second and then nodded once. "Fine, but stay behind me." We walked to the door. The night air was cold, still, too quiet for a suburban street. Each step on the porch felt heavy, Each creak of the wood sounded like thunder. The inspector didn't move as we stepped outside. He just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes locked on us. Finally, he opened his door. The sound of it creaking open made my heart race. He stepped out slowly, his boots crunching against the pavement. The tattoos on his arms seemed to crawl under the glow of the streetlight. And then he smiled. "Couldn't sleep?" my wife asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence. He tilted his head, that smile widening. "Just keeping an eye on the neighborhood," he said softly, "making sure it's safe." His tone made the word safe sound like a threat, and we all knew it. "You need to leave," my wife said. "Now." He chuckled, low, mocking. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about rules anymore. This isn't about lawns or trash cans. This is about power." He stepped closer, and I felt my body tense. His eyes locked on me now. "You married the sheriff. But you're just a man. You can't protect her from me, and she can't protect you from what's coming." My wife raised her gun slightly. "Take one more step," she warned. Her voice didn't shake. It need. Ver did. For a moment, the world froze. The three of us locked in a triangle of silence and rage. And then, he stepped back, raised his hand slowly. Mock surrender. "You think you've won," he sneered. "But this isn't over." He climbed back into his truck, slammed the door, and roared down the street. The sound of the engine fading into the night left me shaking. But my wife? She stood calm, her eyes still locked on the darkness where he had disappeared. "He's not done," she whispered. "He's just getting started." The next day, the neighborhood buzzed. Everyone had heard the truck. Everyone had seen the headlights. Some neighbors came to us quietly, offering help, offering to stand watch. Others closed their blinds tighter, afraid to even be seen talking to us. And then the letters returned. Not HOA violations this time. Anonymous notes shoved under doors, written in thick black marker. "Stay out of this. He owns this street. If you stand with them, you'll pay too." Fear spread again, but so did something else. Defiance. That evening, Richard Cole returned. He sat at our kitchen table, his briefcase open, his face serious. "The county has enough to take down the board," he said. "But the inspector, he's different. He's not just on the board. He's tied to people outside this neighborhood, people who don't want their names exposed." My wife leaned forward. "Then we expose them." Richard shook his head slowly. "Careful. If you go after him directly, he'll come for you harder, and he won't care about laws anymore." But my wife didn't back down. She never did. She opened her folder of evidence, slid photos and letters across the table. "He already came for us, burned our fence, slashed our tires, threatened my family. So I'll ask you this, Richard. Do we wait for him to hurt someone else? Or do we stop him now?" The silence that followed was heavier than any words, and I knew. Then, there was no going back. That night, the inspector returned, not with a truck idling at the curb, but with something worse. I woke to the sound of pounding on the door. Not polite knocks, not even angry fists, but pounding like someone wanted to rip the door off its hinges. I jumped up, heart racing, but my wife was already there, gun in hand, voice steady. She swung the door open, and there he was, the inspector, his face twisted with rage, his hands clenched around a crowbar. He didn't speak. He just raised it high, like he was ready to swing, but before he could, red and blue lights flashed across the street. Police cars, 3 of them, engines roaring, doors flying open, officers shouting commands. "Drop the weapon." The inspector froze, crowbar still in his hand. For the first time, he looked uncertain. For the first time, he looked small. But then, he smiled. That same cruel smile, and he dropped the crowbar slowly onto the porch. "Sheriff," he said softly, almost like a greeting. "Always one step ahead, aren't you?" They cuffed him, dragged him to the squad car. Neighbors poured onto their lawns, whispering, filming on their phones. For a moment, it felt like victory. For a moment, it felt like peace. But as they shoved him into the car, he turned his head, and his eyes locked on mine, cold, burning, promising. "This isn't over," he mouthed. And then the door slammed shut. The next morning, the HOA president resigned. A notice was sent to every home. She cited health reasons. But everyone knew the truth. She was running before the storm reached her. The inspector was gone, at least for now. But the damage remained. The fear, the threats, the scars on the neighborhood. And on us, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was finally over. But then, 2 days later, a package arrived at our door. No return address, no name, just a small brown box. I picked it up carefully, my heart racing. Inside was a single object, a key and a note. You think you've won, but you haven't even seen the real door yet. I stared at it, my hands shaking. My wife read it, her jaw tightening, her eyes narrowing. She didn't speak for a long time, and then finally she whispered, "He's not just fighting us from the outside anymore. He's inside something bigger, and this key, it's a warning." I held it in my hand, heavy, cold, and I realized the truth. The inspector wasn't just one man with a crowbar. He was part of something much larger, and the war wasn't over. It was only changing. The key felt heavier than it should have, not just metal, but meaning, a symbol that the inspector wasn't finished with us. My wife turned it over in her hand, her eyes locked on the teeth, studying it like it was evidence from a crime scene. "It's not random," she said quietly. "This key opens something, and he wants us to find it." I didn't want to admit it, but she was right. The inspector wasn't the type to leave empty threats. He was daring us to step into his world. That night, neither of us slept. The box sat on the table between us, the key shining under the kitchen light, silent, waiting. It felt like it was staring at us, just like he had, by morning. My wife had made her decision. "We're going to find out what it opens," she said firmly. I shook my head. "What if it's a trap?" Her eyes never left the key. "Then we'll walk into the trap on our terms." We started by checking the neighborhood, every mailbox, every shed, every utility box, but the key didn't fit anywhere. Neighbors watched us curiously. Some asked what we were doing. Others stayed silent. I could see the fear in their eyes. The inspector might have been in jail, but his shadow still lived on every lawn. Finally, my wife looked beyond the neighborhood. "The clubhouse," she whispered. "It has to be there." That night, we drove down the dark street to the HOA clubhouse, the same place where all of this had begun, the same place where secrets had always been kept. The building was dark, empty, locked, but when my wife slid the key into the side door, it turned smoothly. Click. The sound echoed like thunder in the silence. We stepped inside. The air smelled stale, like paper and dust. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. Stacks of boxes sat in corners, and at the center, the long table where the board had once sat like judges over us all. My wife pulled out her flashlight. "We're looking for what he left behind," she said. "And trust me, there's something here." We searched for hours, old violation notices, outdated rule books, receipts for landscaping and paint. Nothing important. Nothing new. Until I found it, a locked cabinet in the back corner, rusty, dented, but still sealed tight. The key slid in perfectly. Inside, folders stacked neatly, labeled with names of every homeowner in the neighborhood. I pulled one out. It wasn't just records of fines. It was personal, bank statements, medical notes, even copies of private emails. My stomach turned. The HOA hadn't just been about rules. They had been spying on us, but that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the cabinet was a folder marked with one word: Sheriff. I handed it to my wife. She opened it slowly. Inside were photos of her, taken from a distance, at the grocery store, at the gas station, even outside our own home. Notes scribbled in the margins, times, dates, who she spoke to, what she wore. It wasn't just surveillance, it was obsession. She closed the folder, her hands trembling for the first time since this all began. "This isn't about the HOA anymore," she whispered. "This is personal." The next day, Richard Cole came back. We showed him everything, the files, the photos, the surveillance. His face darkened as he flipped through the papers. "This is bigger than I thought," he admitted. The inspector wasn't just intimidating families, he was collecting leverage, blackmail. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the folder with one hand. With this, the HOA part isn't just finished, they're going to prison. For a moment, I felt relief. For a moment, I thought it was finally over. But my wife shook her head. No, he's still out there, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. Richard frowned. He's in custody. She looked at the photos again, her jaw tightening. Custody isn't the same as gone. Men like him always find a way back. And she was right. 2 nights later, we got another package. This time, no key, just a single sheet of paper. On it was a drawing of our house, and above it, written in black marker. I never needed the board, I only needed you. My chest tightened. It wasn't about rules anymore. It wasn't about the HOA. It was about my wife. The inspector wasn't fighting for power. He was fighting for obsession. That realization cut deeper than any fine, any violation, any threat, because it meant he wouldn't stop. Not until one of them was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur. Court cases, arrests, the HOA board collapsing one by one, the president vanished quietly. Her house sold overnight. Other board members resigned in shame. The neighborhood was free. On paper, at least. But freedom doesn't erase fear. Every time I walked outside, I felt it. Every time I heard an engine in the distance, I froze. Every time I checked the mailbox, I expected another box. My wife stayed calm. She rebuilt the trust of the neighborhood, organized meetings, without gavel or threats, just people talking, for the first time. The street felt like a community again. But behind her calm smile, I saw it too. The weight of what hadn't ended, the shadow that hadn't lifted. The inspector's face still lingered in our windows at night. His words still echoed in my head. You think you've won, but this isn't over. And maybe it wasn't, because one morning, weeks later, I opened the door to get the paper, and there it was, a crow, dead again. But this time, no nail, no blood, just a small silver key tied around its leg. I froze. The key glistened in the early light, different than the first one. New, I picked it up, my hand shaking. My wife came to the door, saw it, and her face hardened. She took the key from my hand, held it up, and whispered, "He's still out there." And that's where the story ends for now. The HOA is gone, the neighborhood is free, but the inspector's shadow still lingers. The war of rules is over, but the war of obsession has only begun. So let me ask you this. If someone left a key on your doorstep tied to the leg of a dead crow, knowing it came from the person who swore they'd never stop, would you use the key to face them head on? Or would you leave town forever?